Hello everyone and thank you for choosing NG Preparation to study for your IB assignments. Now today we're going to be looking at Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, and I will be providing a short literary analysis of the main features found in the novel, as well as the authorial intent and how it deviates or coincides with classic postmodern literature. Let's begin by Vonnegut's authorial intent in writing the novel. Now we get a sense of this in the first chapter, where it is written in the perspective of Vonnegut as he's explaining the process of writing his book. And when he presents the idea to Harrison Starr responds, "Why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead?" Now, the irony in this is that though it seems that Vonnegut's authorial intent was initially to create a book that would hinder people from viewing war in a positive light and to hopefully stop them, what Harrison Starr suggests here is that a piece of literature would never be able to truly stop wars. Nonetheless, I do think that the primary goal of Vonnegut in writing this novel is nonetheless transmitting the absurdity of war and highlighting the trauma that it inflicts on individuals like its protagonist, Billy Pilgrim. Let's take a quick look at the general plot. Now, a note to make about the plot of Slaughterhouse-Five is that the protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, who is also the narrator of the story, tends to become, quote, unstuck in time. That is the phrase that is used. And what Vonnegut means in this phrase is simply that Billy Pilgrim loses track of time, and therefore his narration is not chronological. However, in the beginning of chapter 2, we get a short overview of Billy Pilgrim's life, who grows up in New York, takes classes at the School of Optometry, and eventually is drafted into the Army during World War II. Billy is then thrown into his first battle and then is taken prisoner. And it is in this instant of being taken prisoner that he first experiences becoming unstuck in time. Now, this is relevant to our literary analysis because one of the main conundrums in looking at Slaughterhouse-Five is whether or not the alien abduction and the loss of chronological time is a reflection of Billy Pilgrim's insanity or if it is actually happening. And the fact that Billy first experienced becoming unstuck in time during such a stressful and traumatic experience kind of suggests to us that it was a form of a defense mechanism or an escape mechanism. Billy and other Americans were then taken to Dresden, a German city. And these are the horrors that inspired the writing of Kurt Vonnegut's novel, because while they were there, bombs are dropped into the city and asphyxiates or burns about 130,000 people. As Kurt Vonnegut describes it, quote, "Dresden was one big flame. The one flame ate everything organic, everything that would burn." The quote indicates that the flame didn't discriminate among the people that it was killing, but that it killed blindly. And in the face of these flames, no man was less likely to die than another. Luckily, Billy manages to survive by hiding himself in a meat locker since the camp used to be a slaughterhouse. And of course, that is relevant to the naming of the novel because it is by a use of foreshadowing that the camp finds itself in a former slaughterhouse. And then this tragedy happens. Once Billy returns to his hometown, he gets engaged to Valencia Marble, a woman who he does not truly love or has ever been attracted to. Now, Billy quickly finds himself becoming wealthy, owns a Cadillac, a nice home, and it seems like he has left the traumas of war behind. But it isn't until he comes across a barbershop quartet on his wedding anniversary that he realizes that it has triggered a memory of Dresden and he breaks down. And this indicates that even if unbeknownst to him, the memories of Dresden and the traumas that accompany them still persist with him. And it is on the night of his daughter's wedding, around 1967, that Billy is first kidnapped by the aliens, who we then learn are called Chalfa Madorians. They put him in something that is like a zoo, and they mate him with the movie actress named Montana Wildhack. And what is peculiar about this planet is that they, like Billy, do not view time in chronological order. On the contrary, even when people die, that person is alive at another period of time in the past. So that is where the phrase "and so it goes" comes from in the novel. You might have noticed that whenever Vonnegut or Billy refers to the death of someone, they add "and so it goes." Upon his return to Earth, Billy suffers from a plane crash, and as he is being operated on, his wife is driving to the hospital to visit him, and she dies of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay, but how does Slaughterhouse-Five coincide or deviate from the conventions of postmodern literature? Well, to look at postmodern literature, here are some of the main characteristics that define postmodern literature. The first one is metafiction, that it is always clear to the reader that it is a work of fiction. There is a straying away from reality that is clear. We are constantly reminded that it's a work of fiction, and we actually really see this in the first chapter where Vonnegut speaks directly to the reader about his creation of the book. So there's never any doubt in the reader's mind about this being a work of fiction. The second really big aspect of postmodern literature is fragmentation, and this is really clear in the fact that we have a cyclical storyline, meaning that we don't see the plot happening chronologically. It actually seems to go back and forth throughout time, and that's a big component of the fragmentation aspect of postmodern literature. The third really big part of postmodern literature is co-creation. What we mean by co-creation is that there's a deviation between what we think Vonnegut is writing the storyline out to be, and then what is just simply a creation of Billy Pilgrim's mental state. So it's like we have two creators in the novel, Vonnegut, the author, and Billy Pilgrim, the unreliable narrator. And of course, the last one would be the unconventional story arc, which is very similar to fragmentation since the storyline is non-linear. But what also makes the story arc unconventional is that we kind of end with the idea that Billy Pilgrim can go back and forth in time, so it's not really an end at all. In fact, the novel ends with Billy Pilgrim contemplating his death, but then realizing that he has lived it many times before and that he can go back in time to live his life over and over again. Now, one of the written task questions that you're provided with, question 5 asks you, how does the text conform to or deviate from the conventions of a particular genre and for what purpose? So here I'll be giving you the tools to answer this question with regards to postmodern literature. If we were sort of to create a written task to outline to look at how Vonnegut's employment of postmodern literary techniques allows him to fulfill his authorial intent of portraying the absurdity of war and the horrors of it, we would come across a thesis that looks kind of like this. Vonnegut employs postmodern literary techniques to meet his goal of exposing the absurdity of war. So let's look at the points that we could cover in answering or in supporting this thesis statement. So our first point could be that the convention of co-creation and really unreliable narration allows the reader to understand Billy Pilgrim's instability and how his war experiences have distorted his idea of reality and left him less than sane. It is also worth noting that when Slaughterhouse-Five was written, PTSD was not really known of. But the way that we understand his emotional detachment from everything around him, we do get the sense that he is suffering from internal traumas or PTSD. The unreliable narration also shows us how what is happening inside his head is so different from what is happening in everybody else's reality. And that allows us to understand how difficult it is to live with the horrors of war when your family members and everyone around you does not really understand them. How do we go about deciding if Billy Pilgrim's interactions with the Tralfamadorians are delusions or if they're actually happening? Well, if we look at a lot of the aspects of his interactions with them and what the planet Tralfamador looks like, a lot of the inspiration that the aliens are taking for their planet is taken from Billy Pilgrim's happiest memories. When he is taken to the planet, he is mated with a former movie star, Montana Wildhack. Interestingly, there is a scene in the book where Billy Pilgrim actually comes across a magazine entitled What Happened to Montana Wildhack, which in a way foreshadows the fact that he will meet Montana Wildhack, which is interesting because the fact that this sparks a curiosity in Billy Pilgrim and is then reflected in the alien planet suggests to us that it is all a product of his imagination and his lack of sanity. It's also worth noting that his creation of an alien planet is what he would consider paradise. He has been mated with a former movie star, and there is no such thing as permanent death, and fate is predetermined. According to the aliens, there's nothing that we can do to change the path of life and of fate. So that completely absolves Billy of any responsibility whatsoever and sets his mind at ease about his actions during the war and the deaths that happened there. So we could easily argue that Billy Pilgrim's creation of an alien universe is just an escape mechanism. It's just a way to get away from all of the regrets and responsibility that trouble him. After all, he comes unstuck in time in the moments that are most convenient to him. For instance, on his wedding night to get away from his wife that he isn't really attracted to. And in the alien planet, he's mated with this beautiful woman, Montana. But the fact that Montana is chosen to be mated with Billy in this alien planet is also significant. She doesn't care about anything. She can be compared almost to Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. She's a careless, rich, and attractive woman that doesn't have to worry herself about anything. And that sends the message that the only people that can really be happy or survive in the alien planet are careless people. But why does Kurt Vonnegut use metafiction in his creation about this tale of the bombings of Dresden and the horrors of war? Well, metafiction can arguably be employed in this novel to transmit the message that the horrors of war are unspeakable, and they can only really be spoken about in imagery, metaphor, simile, in other words, in figurative literary devices, because speaking about them directly is too traumatic. An example of Vonnegut's use of figurative language, such as irony and juxtaposition, when describing his experiences in the war and the absurdity of it, is when he describes war takes everything out of its natural state. And a dog that Pilgrim, they carry a German Shepherd by the name of Princess. Now, the fact that they're carrying what is probably a domesticated pet and they're using her as a sort of war weapon shows how a pet is now almost dehumanized in the form of a weapon of war. And this reiterates the idea that no one is prepared to endure the horrors of war. Just like when Mary O'Hare in the beginning of the novel mentioned that Slaughterhouse-Five should be called the Children's Crusade because all the soldiers that go into war are children and become children in the face of such traumas, and it is cruel to put anyone in this position. But what about the non-conventional story arc and the fact that time is not chronological, non-linear, and reflects an aspect of fragmentation, which again coincides with postmodern literature? Well, I think that it's really clear that the fact that Billy Pilgrim has to relive his experiences over and over again transmit how messy the fallout of war can be, and Billy Pilgrim's own lack of ability to understand the cause and effect of his life choices and his memories clearly. In the very beginning of the novel, Vonnegut includes the message, "This is a novel somewhat in the telegraphic schizophrenic manner of tales." And indeed, the plot is schizophrenic and moves back and forth without any real explanation. And this sort of fleeting aspect to moving from one moment to the other also reflects how Billy Pilgrim never sits down and thinks about the moments that have happened in his life. It's too traumatic for him to dwell on certain moments, so it seems that he flits back and forth between different memories in order to avoid the trauma of remembering anything too specifically. Billy Pilgrim describes the death of his wife due to accidental monoxide poisoning. He does so in less than a sentence. He simply says that she died accidentally, and it almost seems humorous or just frivolous. I think this lack of detail and this quick movement between different ideas is supposed to show again how Billy Pilgrim is so detached from everything happening around him. Maybe he doesn't even register them because he's living his life so absent-mindedly and so absorbed in his own traumas. And even though in a lot of ways Billy Pilgrim's ability to go into an alien planet where everything is predetermined, no choices need to be made, and no blame needs to be assigned is a form of a defense mechanism. The fact that Billy Pilgrim is forced for the rest of his life to relive old memories, this creates a sort of fright in him. And this is reflected when Billy Pilgrim stops and thinks what part of his life he is going to have to act in next, meaning he doesn't know where he will find himself in the next 5 minutes. If he'll be back into a scene of war, I think this again reflects the horrors of PTSD, that those suffering from it live in constant fear that they're going to be propelled back into the past. And this is the purpose of the cyclical events and the non-linear storyline. So to conclude this short outline, we've used examples from the novel, and we've used mentioning of literary devices such as juxtaposition and metaphor to transmit how Vonnegut employs the literary techniques of unreliable narration, metafiction, and cyclical events to give us more insight into Billy Pilgrim's state of mind and his suffering with schizophrenia/PTSD, and this really shows us the fallout that war creates. This novel strips away the romanticism and the idealization that humans tend to associate with war, and once this is stripped away, all that's left is carnage